extend a warm welcome to the actual audience sitting here today who braved the Jerusalem rain to come here this evening. And I want to welcome the people who are out there. I can't see any of you, but I take it as a matter of faith that you're out there. And we have a long tradition of taking on faith, believing that things that we can't actually see are there. Ein lo demut haguf ve'eno guf, but we know you're there and we welcome you. This evening, we are going to look at what I think is a very entertaining biblical story. So entertaining, in fact, that it launched a successful commercial play here in Israel that I had the privilege of seeing. And I have to say, one of the things that I love most about living in this wonderful country of ours is that you can go to the theater on any evening of the week and sometimes stumble upon a play that is based entirely on the 21st chapter of the Book of Kings, and everybody gets all the references. So I enjoy doing this. The story in question highlights a rare and, I would say, reflexive verb. And I'm going to ask you if anyone can tell me what this verb means. I hope I have the ability to move it this way. The verb is the word lehitmaker. You can see that. Reflexive. In Hebrew, what do we call that verb form? Hitpael. The root we recognize, mem chaf resh, to sell. So lehitmaker, and the reflexive would be to
negotiate.
Not exactly. That's more lehitmakeach. That's another kind of. But a selling that is in the reflexive would be to sell oneself. To sell oneself. And that is an intriguing word. That word is going to appear twice in the story that we're going to be studying this evening. And interestingly, that word is used in modern Hebrew to mean, anybody know, lehitmaker? Addiction. Okay, so here's a word, an unusual word that appears twice in this story, seems to be kind of the highlight of the story, and it's the same word that is used in modern Hebrew for addiction. Okay, and really what I would like to suggest here this evening is that there is a close relationship, in fact, between certain types of behaviors. In the story, in the question of the 21st chapter of the Book of Kings, some very troubling behaviors, a kind of escalating criminal behavior, something that starts with what I like to call small crimes, misdemeanors, and gradually progresses until we get to the worst of all possible crimes. Okay, so to illustrate, we are now going to take a close look at the story, the 21st chapter of the Book of Kings, the story of Navot and the sale, Navot and his vineyard. However, one more word of introduction. Before we get there, as background, I'm going to ask you to look at these pages that you have in front of you. You out there, you've got them too. Take them out. And we are going to look at the Ten Commandments, which I would like to look at it as the Torah's microcosm of all of its mitzvot. And I think that the structure of the Ten Commandments, I don't know if you can see that, yes? I think adds some insight into the psychological workings of good and evil. And here, I think to better understand this, it would be helpful to divide the commandments into categories. And here, I've displayed the entire gamut of my artistic abilities with this beautiful set of tablets. And here I have put 5 of the commandments here and matching 5 over there. Traditionally, when we divide the commandments, we divide them in half on the basis of what? 5 and 5. The first 5 are Ben Adam Lamakom, between human beings and God, and the second 5 are Ben Adam Lachariro, among human beings themselves. That's a very handy and I think very true kind of a division to make. Just to back that up, by the way, which one of these would become problematic in that division? If these are all between human beings and God, and these are all between human beings among themselves, which one doesn't seem to fit? Kabeh, honor your parents. I just want to give you a linguistic support for the notion that this actually does belong in the first half. If you look here on your page, you'll see in source number 1 that in all 5 of the first half, all 5 in the first half, you have a recurring term. What is that term that appears in all 5? Hashem Elokecha, the Lord your God. Okay, and that's a kind of guiding word that helps us understand if that phrase appears there, if that term appears there, somehow these mitzvot really do govern our relationship with God, including honoring your parents. Whereas in the second half, there's another recurring word. What is it? Re'acha. Your what's it translated here? Your neighbor. Right? So the guiding principle here is your relationship with the Lord your God, and the guiding principle here is your relationship with your neighbor. Okay, so I think that's some good support to the notion that this 50-50 split works very well. Okay, but let's try to further subdivide, and if you turn your page to source number 2, you'll see that even Ezra looks at a different kind of split. He says the following. All the mitzvot can be divided into three categories. Ha'achat mitzvot halev. The first are precepts of the heart, and the second, he says, are mitzvot halashon. They are mitzvot that govern speech, and the third are mitzvot that govern action. And then he says, v'mitzvot halev hem ha'ikarim hanichbadim al kulam. The precepts of the heart are the most important of all. So I thought it might be interesting to take even Ezra's split and see how things play out with our split here. Okay, now without getting strangled, I'm going to try to move over here and ask you to go through these and try to apply even Ezra's categorizations to all of the 10 commandments. Anochi, I am the Lord your God, heart, speech, or action. Okay, and some of them are borderline, but just try to figure which one best answers. Lo yiyelecha, don't worship other gods. Heart. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Speech. Remember the Shabbat. That's one of those woolly ones. Okay, action. And honor your parents. Also action. Okay, so if we notice our trajectory in the first 5, we've got mitzvot of the heart, moving on to mitzvot of speech, moving on then to mitzvot of action. Now let's look at our second half. Don't murder, what's that? Action. Don't commit adultery. Action. Don't steal. Don't bear false witness. Speech. And don't covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. So notice what has happened here. Our trajectory here is action, speech, heart. Okay, so if we go back and look at the whole thing, the first 5 that we have decided govern relations between us and God, the progression is from the heart to the tongue to our action, whereas in mitzvot that govern our relations with others, we start with the heart, we start with action, we move on to speech, and we culminate with the heart. So the question is why? What's the point of all of that? That was a question. Any responses? I know they told you not to make noise, but answering questions is okay. Well, here's a thought. Nobody likes dead time, right? I would like to suggest, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Say that it begins and ends with the heart.
Yes, good. It begins and ends with the heart. Okay, let's start with this, and I want to get back to your point. On the whole, I would just, citing even Ezra, and Rambam writes along these lines as well, they suggest that these progressions suggest that there's a kind of inevitable move from one type of activity to another. When we choose a certain path of behavior, whether it's good or bad, there's a tendency to continue in that same path with escalations, with constant escalations. So that we start with our heart. If we choose a good path, we will speak in that good way. We will then act in that good way, and the same is true if we choose negative behaviors. But that doesn't really account for this ABCCBA. What do we call that in fancy language? This crossing, right? Chiastic structure. It doesn't account for that. And so what I wanted to suggest here, please say what you said again.
I said that it begins and ends with the heart.
Okay, it begins and ends, that it's rather than just a straight linear progression, that perhaps what we're looking at here is a kind of dialectic, a kind of self-reinforcing cycle that goes on here, that once we embark, and I'm going to talk about crime because that's where we're headed with this story, it becomes a kind of self-perpetuating, constantly regenerating cycle. We start with a decision that we make in our heart. From there, we move on to our speech. From there, we move on to our actions. Those actions lead to more actions that are of the same kind. That will again bring us back to speech. It will re-engage our heart and start the whole thing all over again. Okay? It's a kind of cycle that we can get locked into, which, again, what I want to suggest here is going to mirror, in some sense, the process of addiction. Okay, let's now look at the story and see how this kind of thing happens. The story is, as mentioned, in the 21st chapter of the Book of Kings, Melachim Aleph. And here, the characters in the story are, so far, Achav, the king, and Navot, seemingly a simple man who owns a vineyard. And one day, the king, Achav, comes to this man, Navot, and requests that he sell him his vineyard. Okay, if you look here, it's in source number 3. And I want to ask you now, this is going to be the first of our Chavruta sessions. I want you to take 3 minutes, talk to the person next to you, and ask yourselves, what tone are you detecting here? What is the attitude of this King Achav in requesting to purchase this vineyard that belongs to Nabal? Okay? Command. First read it, take your time, talk it out. That was quick. Give the rest of us some time. Yes.
ויהי אחר הדברים האלה, הרם היה לנבוא בישראל, אשר בישראל, ויצא מיכל אחאב מלך שלום. וידבר אחאב אל נבוא, שאל לי את פניו, ויהי לגד ירח, שהוא קרוב הסודי. ועצמה לך שמך, הרם טוב, וטוב עיניך, נשמע לך. Yeah.
Okay, everyone. I hope you had a good time with that. If you had to characterize the king's attitude and tone in this initial offer to Nabot, how would you characterize it?
Persuasive.
Persuasive, okay. A demand. Interesting. Okay, yes.
Generous.
Generous. Okay, we've got a machloket going here. Yes.
I believe you said both, like aggressive and generous.
Aggressive and generous. Yeah.
He's the king. He could have just taken it.
Great. Great.
But
Let's start with from that point. This king might have gone up to Navot and said, "Give me your vineyard, or I will kill you." He doesn't do that. Okay, and that is a crucial observation to make at the very outset. Instead of doing that, what does he do? Now let's look at it together. Anything unusual about that opening statement? Navot ha-Yisraeli. There was a vineyard to Navot, the Jezreelite, right? Asher Yisrael, who was in Jezreel.
He belongs in that land.
Good. Okay, this seems to be very repetitive, unnecessarily so. The text seems to be emphasizing he is an indigenous, he's part of this land. He is the rightful owner of this land. The land is part of him. Eitzel, and now let's contrast that with Eitzel, Heichal Achav Melech Shomron, next to the palace of Achav, the king of Shomron, Samaria. So here we've got this indigenous landowner, and we're going to contrast him with this external king who comes from another place entirely. He comes from Shomron, but he's got designs on that piece of land. Vayidaber Achav el Navot lemor, tina li et karmecha. Okay, his opening statement. Give me your vineyard. V'hili legan yarak. It will be for me for a vegetable garden. Ki hu karov etzel beiti. It's near my home. Ve'etna lecha tachtav kerem tov mimenu. I'll give you a better vineyard for it, or than it. Im tov ve'enecha etna lecha chesef mechir zeh. If you prefer, okay. Let's try to break this down. First of all, he says to me, give me your vineyard. Okay, there is an acknowledgement of ownership of Navot. You own it. I want it. It's yours, but I want you to give it to me. And now he gives several reasons that he wants it. What are his reasons?
It's near my house.
Okay, it's near my house, and I want it for a vegetable garden. Now, first of all, let's note the irony here. What's the irony?
Well, it seems a degradation of a vineyard.
Of a vineyard! Sell me your vineyard so I can harvest cucumbers in it. What's going on there, right? Sell me your Mercedes so I can cut it down and take this, sell it for spare parts. There doesn't seem to be a full appreciation or respect for the nature of this land. He's saying, I want it for some other purpose. But he gives him reasons. Why do I want it? Two different reasons. Now, if you were negotiating, let's go back to the example of a car. You want a car. Is this a good technique that he's using here? Is he a good, you used the word negotiation before. Is he a good negotiator? Let's say you want a car. Would you say to the person who owns the car, here are the reasons that no other car will do, and why I absolutely have to have this car and no other, right? It's really, really just the car for me. Give you two reasons why it's the car for me, and please feel free to name your price. I will pay more than market value for it. Would you do that?
No.
Okay, so there seems to be some, the tone here, although we might detect a certain degree of kingliness here, there's also, I think, a good degree of what? Respect.
Politeness.
What?
Politeness.
Politeness, deference.
I think Achav knows that he's really, when it tells us Yisraeli from Israel, he actually knows it can't really happen, or it shouldn't really happen.
Yes, he understands. He understands that this is not his to take. But you get the sense that he's kind of tiptoeing here to try to get Novo to persuade him. Somebody said persuasive, to be generous, make him an offer he can't refuse in the nice way of making an offer you can't refuse. Yes?
I don't see it that way at all. Because he's saying, I'll give you for your land money or something else, very good.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not saying, if you want. He's saying, that's what I will do.
Right? Well, he does say if you want.
Let's negotiate.
He does. He says, in tov ve'enecha. He's telling him, you get to name your currency. Right? What's the first currency he offers? There's also an awareness of what it is that is most valuable to Navot. What's most valuable? What does he offer first? Not money. A vineyard. You want land. I'll give you better land.
I think what he means is that you're going to be given a choice, but you don't have the essential.
Okay, so there might be, and I think several of you are picking this up. Is there a tone there that, right? I'm offering you A or B, but C is really not an option, right? You can't pick none of the above. Perhaps there's an undercurrent of that, and as we're going to see, things are not going to go well for Navot. Okay, but at least at the very outset, he offers him. The currency is land because land is what is valued, and he says, "I'll give you better land, and if you prefer money, then I'll give you money." Okay, so he starts off this way, and again, we have to ask ourselves, why? Why does this powerful king start off in this way? Why doesn't he just steal it? And it seems that at least at the beginning of this story, it's important for Achav to have a sense of propriety, to have a sense of decency. He's doing the right thing. He is first giving Navot a chance to sell this piece of land to him legitimately, and to get it without using any kind of force, without breaking any laws. Okay? However, the problem is, Navot is not going to go for it. And let's look now just below where it says reactions to the refusal. Okay? Vayomer Navot, in Pasuk Gimel, verse 3. Vayomer Navot el Achav, Chalila li me Hashem, mititi et nachalat avotai lach. His first reaction, he gives how many different reasons to refuse? Chalila li me Hashem means
God will allow.
God will not allow it. Mititi et nachalat avotai lach.
Because he's real reasons.
Okay, first it's God, then it's nachalat avot, and finally he says lach. God won't allow it, my fathers won't allow it, and because of that, I can't give it to you. Okay, we're going to hold that in the back of our minds for a moment, because before we get back to this, to Navot's reaction, I want to look at Achav. Let's concentrate on Achav for a moment. In verse 4, Vayavo Achav el beito sar v'zaif. He comes back home, he is fuming. Al hadavar asher diber elav Navot hayizraeli, about that which Navot the Jezreelite had said to him. Okay, now pay close attention. Vayomer. Now this is Achav's paraphrase in his own mind of what Navot had said to him. Lo eten lecha et nachalat avotai. I will not give to you the inheritance of my fathers. Vayishkav al mitato vayasev et panav velo achal lachem. He lay down in his bed, he turned his face, and he refused to eat bread. Okay, now this is very interesting, and I want to get back to that wonderful play that I saw here in Jerusalem called, that was based on this story. The name of the play was a one-word name. It was called simply ochlim, eating, consuming. And basically, their take on this theatrical company's take on this story is that it's a story about appetites run wild. And it starts with a king who wants to eat. He wants to plant a vegetable garden. And he tries to get it through, at first at least, through some kind of reasonable means. When that doesn't happen, he gets furious and miserable. And notice what happens here. He sounds like a petulant child. If I can't eat the thing I want, I'm not going to eat anything. I'm going to sit here and cry and look at this wall until somebody gets me my food, the food that I really want. Refuses to eat. Okay, next. This is the bottom of the page. Why is it that you're so miserable and you're not eating? Right? Again, she's all obsessive about his eating. Everybody's concerned about his eating. He doesn't want to eat. She wants him to eat. And he said to her, because I said to that Navot, give me your vineyard. And he said to me, I will not give you my vineyard. Okay, now we're going to pause. How many times until this point have we seen how many versions have we seen of Navot's refusal? Take a look at it again. How many versions? Three different versions. The first one is where? Is Navot's own words, which is in verse 3, where he actually said, Chalila li me Hashem, God will not allow it for me to give nachalat avotai, the inheritance of my fathers. And in fact, there is a midrash on the name of Navot. Notice this, nachalat avot, Navot. Right? If you take the nun from here and connect it to that, he is his parental heritage. He says, I can't. God won't let me. My heritage won't let me, and that's why I can't give it to you. That's what Navot actually said. What's the second account? What verse? Verse 4. And whose account is this?
It's like self remembering.
his own ruminations, replaying what he heard. Okay, and now we get a little perspective into Achav's mind. What did he hear? Vayomer, lo eten lecha. Okay, first comes lecha, et nachalat avotai. What happened here?
God are gone.
Okay, God is gone. What comes first? The lecha. I won't give to you the inheritance of my fathers. Okay, it's become a little more personal than about his responsibilities. I won't give it to you. And by the way, it's my father's inheritance. By the third time that this story is told, where is that? In verse 6, when he's telling it over to his wife, Izebel, all of a sudden we're left with Lo etein lecha et karmi. What happened to God? Gone. What happened to Nachalat Avot? Gone. What's left? It sounds like a playground brawl. I want what you have, you won't give it to me, I'm really angry at you. You're a nasty person. Okay, there is a certain psychological process that Achav has embarked on that is going to allow him, and this is the essential point here, it's going to allow him to progress from this initial point of reasonableness, of relative decency, to a point where this guy, and I hope I'm not giving away anything at this moment, where this guy, Navot, is going to end up dead. How do we get from this to this? And it begins right here. It begins with this series of rationalizations that go on in Achav's brain. What has he done here? What is the point of all this? What has he done by these subtle little shifts in reviewing what actually happened? What has he done?
It's taken away any justice that Achav might have.
Okay, he's delegitimizing the rightful owner of this vineyard. He's turning it into a matter of his own personal whim, of his lack of generosity. Right? He's holding on to something when he has no right to do it. I asked him nicely and he wouldn't give it to me. Right? The sense now that Achav, and how absurd it is, that this mighty king has now begun to see himself as a victim of this guy Navot, who is now this powerful victimizer. And he's the guy with all the goods, and he refuses to give it to me. Now, why is that important, to turn himself into a victim and the other guy into the victimizer? What's that going to allow him to do? Rationalize anything he's going to do, because it's self-defense. This guy's after me. He's doing terrible things to me. I simply have to defend myself. And if I have to do some things that I'm not entirely proud of, well, he started it. So we have to understand this.
But if Nabot had any common sense.
What's that?
If Nabot had any common sense.
What would he have done?
When the king comes to you and says to you, irrespective of how he says it, you don't argue, you negotiate. Perhaps you'll rent him the field for 20 years.
Yes,
or you
yes,
share the
yes.
produce of it.
Yes.
Nabot seemed to have a simple mind.
Okay, and in the play, by the way, they had him with a little kovat tembel on his head. It was really funny. They made him look like a very, very simple person, totally naive, had no clue. But you're right. We also have the benefit of reading the story and maybe learning some of the lessons. But yes, he could have played it a little bit, a little more with a little more cleverness on his end. He seems. I think they kind of caught it. There's a sense of naivete here, where he just speaks his mind. He doesn't try to cover himself.
Yeah, but Nabot also used the term, "I will not give you the field." He wasn't asked to give it. He was asked to sell it.
Yes.
Big difference. The king makes a big deal about it, but Nabot started it off by not saying, "I will not sell the field," or "I cannot sell the field," because I will not give it.
Yes.
It's very different.
Yes. Okay, I want to get back to the sense of victimization here, and I have to just interject for a moment. If we have a moment, sure, why not? When I was writing my book, I spent an inordinate amount of time in a very popular cafe in these parts called Cafe Aroma. Some of you familiar with it? Really the cheapest office space around. 10 shekels, sit there all day. And I started noticing, it was hard not to notice when I was trying to concentrate, that there were, at any given moment of the day, numerous people screaming into their cell phones. You did this and you so-and-so, and how could you do that to me? And it's yelling. And one day it just hit me after hearing a chorus of these people yelling. I'm thinking, wow, what are the odds? I'm sitting here with all these innocent victims and all those nasty victimizers on the other end of the phones. That's really a coincidence. Right? But then I realized this is human nature writ large, right in front of me. Right? This is what we do. In order to tell ourselves that the actions that we take, that I'm okay for doing what I'm doing, we have to turn the other person into somebody who isn't okay. And I think that's the very human little piece of activity that we see here in this story of Achav. Together with us, and I see the next related ingredient in this spiraling trajectory of crime, I think is going to be the denial of responsibility, which I think is a very strong undercurrent in this story. First of all, if Achav is a victim, then nothing is his fault, and everything is justifiable self-defense. But in addition, he is going to deny responsibility by refraining from directly harming anyone. And we're going to look back at the text in a moment to see how that happens. Okay, let's look back in verse 7. This beautifully ironic verse. Okay, after he has his little tantrum, his wife says to him, "Vatomer elav izev ishto, ata ta'aseh melucha al Yisrael." You now, and this like a little audio play here, ata, get up and be a king. Kum echol lechem. Again, the food, eat. V'itav libecha, feel good for goodness sake. Ani eten lecha et kerem navot ha'Yisraeli. I will give you the get up and be a king, and I'll get it for you. Don't worry, dear. Right? There's something very much at odds there, where he's be powerful but be completely powerless. Give the power to me. And we get the sense that this is a pivotal moment in this story, where she says this, and Achav now has a choice to make. What are his options at this point when she says that? What? He could say no. He could say no. He could say, well, excuse me, dear, but I tried and it didn't work. What exactly are you going to do? Right? And he doesn't do that, and that's a choice. He has a sense, one senses, that she's going to do something that isn't pretty, but he chooses not to know. And that is a denial of his responsibility in this thing, to say, right, I didn't hear it, I didn't know it, I didn't say a word. Right? His silence, though, is an active decision. And here, if I were writing my memoirs from my life in the United States to my life in Israel, I would call it something like from Richard Nixon to Ehud Olmert, nothing new under the sun. Right? I didn't know, I didn't see, nobody told me. Right? That somehow, by not being told directly, you can say that you had nothing to do with it. Right now, sometimes that works, and often it doesn't. But here, what she's saying to him is, from now on, I'm going to take over. Okay, let's turn now to the plot. What is her plot? Verse 8. Vatichtov sifarim b'shem Achav. Okay, this is just astounding. Talk about giving up responsibility. She is writing these books in the name of the king. And she's sealing them. She reaches into his drawer, takes out his royal seal, and stamp. Right? King Achav says this, all good. Vatishlach hasifarim el hazikenim ve'el hachorim asher be'iro hayoshuvim et Navot. She sends these books to the elders and the notables in Navot city. Vatichtov basifarim lemor. And what does she write? Kirut som. Call a fast. And why do you laugh?
Well, it has to do with the food again.
Again, the food. My husband needs food, and now everybody else is going to go without food until we can feed him. Okay, there's absolute lack of concern for anyone other than the royal court. Everybody else can starve until this issue is resolved to our liking.
There are echoes here of Achashverosh.
Okay. Achashverosh.
Well, he also has people.
Absolutely right. These royal decrees, yes.
And that kind of thing.
Yes. Okay, so she calls out to call a fast. V'hoshivu et navot b'rosh ha'am. Okay, now here comes the really evil part of the plot. Place navot at the head of the nation. V'hoshivu shinayim anashim b'nei v'lial. Place two men who are, what's b'nei v'lial? I love the translation here. Scoundrels, right? Where are you going to find scoundrels? Open up the yellow pages, look under S, and you will find them. Put these two scoundrels opposite him. V'iduhu lemor berachta Elohim v'melech. And they will testify against him, saying, you have blasphemed, this is a euphemism for cursing, berach, you have blasphemed God and the king, v'hotzi'uhu v'sikluhu v'yamot. Take him out of the city, stone him, and he will die. Why is this the punishment of choice, the plot of choice? What happens, does anybody know in ancient law what would happen if a person blasphemed God and the king? What happens to the person's property? Guess where it goes? Yes, indeed. How convenient is that? Okay? If he is accused and convicted of blasphemy, his property goes to the king. So even though murder is actually being committed, it's being committed under the guise of propriety. By writing these books, sending them out to the notables, and sending them off out into the world. Okay, now I want to ask you to take another 2 minutes and look at just below this where it says the trial, excuse me, read it, and I want to ask you, is there any difference? We looked before at the different versions of a story in Achab's mind. Is there any difference between the plot as articulated by Izebel and the plot as it actually plays out? Okay, so take a minute and to compare the two things. You with me? You guys with me? Great. Let's go. Okay. First of all, I want to point out that these two are quite the tag team. He slops off the responsibility, hands it to her, and now it seems that she has taken the responsibility on herself only to drop it like a hot potato. what happens here in this plot? Who actually is going to kill Navot? Who?
His community.
His community, the people. Okay? And what is the step before that? Who is going to lead most directly to the people stoning Navot?
The elders.
No, not yet.
The scoundrels.
The scoundrels who are going to do what? Testify falsely. Okay? Who's going to employ the scoundrels? The elders and the notables. That's where they come in. Who orders the elders and the notables to do what they do? Not quite. The king, right? The book. The book. She sends out a book. And who writes the book? Jezebel. So how many stages have we got between this woman, between Ahav and the murder of Navot? We've got about 5 or 6 stages from the person who's actually making it happen to the crime itself. Right? And that's really what he wants to happen. And Jezebel understands that he wants to happen, and she creates distance between herself, even though she's his proxy, but then she goes on to do the same thing, to create that distance from herself to the actual crime. Now, as to the actual crime, the command as it's given is sit opposite who? What? V'hoshivu shnayim anashim b'nei Belial negdo. What are they looking at? In the order that she gives. Straight at him. Negdo. Neged me. Navot. Look him in the eye. V'iduhu lemor. And what are they told to say? What? Berachta Elohim v'melech. You, Navot, they're looking at him, they're testifying against him to his face. That's what they're told. You have blasphemed God and the king. Right? That's what they're ordered to do. And at this moment, I'm reminded, I opened by saying all the things that I love about Israel. One thing that I love a little bit less is sometimes the completely out of control nature of the corruption that goes on here. And I remember at one point a few years ago, things got so bad. There was a full-page headline in Ma'ariv. It was 2 words, the entire page. Efo habusha. Where's the shame? That was it. Everybody was just speechless. That was all that was left to say. Where's the shame? In this story, I'm reminded of that because you wonder, where's the shame? And we find it. But we find it in the least likely place. Where do we find it? Who's got a little bit of shame?
The scoundrels.
The scoundrels. Why do you say that?
Because they can't look him in the eye.
Exactly. If we look at the trial itself, how it's carried out, okay, at the end of the piece where it says the trial, they are told to look him in the face and say, Beirachta, but instead, who do they look at? V'ayiduhu anshe ha-Belial et Navot neged ha'am. This is a very subtle little switch. Instead of negdo, neged ha'am. They can't face him, they face the people. Lemor, Berach Navot. That guy over there that we are not looking at right now, he blasphemed. A tiny little shift gives us, I think, speaks volumes to us, that there seems to be some limit, but here it's only the people who are professional scoundrels who have it. Okay? It's really quite amazing. Okay, now comes the reactions. And again, let's take a look at the bottom of the page. I'm going to ask you to read this. All right, this will be our last independent session. Take a look at it and tell me what do you find in common between the reactions of Achav and Jezebel in hearing the news. Bottom of the page, page 2.
It's really weird. It's pretending. Or it's like more like like instead of saying, we're not on the road. Right, there's that. It's almost like afraid of him. Afraid of him. It's a line. He just looked here.
Okay, everybody.
Oh, yeah, I was going to.
Before we get back to the reactions, I put 5 of our commandments back on the board because I just wanted to show you how fascinating. Rambam sent us to this story to talk about the progressive nature, the incremental nature of sin. And here, sure enough, starting at the end, we started with Lo Tachmod. He covets the vineyard. From there, we move on to Lo Ta'aneh, bearing false witness. From there, Lo Tignov, stealing the vineyard. Okay, now Rambam has some explaining to do with this one. There is no adultery as far as I can tell in the story, but we get this one in spades, Lo Tirtzah. So we just move straight up the list, and the sense that there's almost an inevitability about this. That once our hearts are engaged, Lo Tachmod, our speech is bound to follow, and then our actions are going to follow, and our actions are going to spiral until we get to the worst possible actions without ever realizing that was a choice that we made. Right? It's something that almost happens without our conscious decision being made. But let's get back to what you just looked at. Vayihi kishmoa Izebel, ki sukal navot vayamot. What is it that Izebel hears? Okay, we get the feeling that if there were phones, she would have been waiting next to her for the news, right? Ki sukal. What does sukal mean? He was stoned. Okay, it's almost as if those stones stoned him. There were no people attached to the stones. He was stoned, and he died. Okay, and then she says to Achav, straight into action, get up and go inherit this vineyard of Navot HaYisraeli, Asher me'en laten lecha v'chesef. Okay, now she's stating this in stronger terms than we've ever seen before. Me'en, refused. He refused. This is a kind of retroactive rewriting of the story. There was a willful refusal on his part to sell you his vineyard. Ki en navot chai ki met. He's dead. And now we have this parallel that's set up. Vayhi ki shmoa Izebel. It was when Izebel heard. And similarly, Vayhi ki shmoa Achav. Right? If she's waiting by her phone, so is he. Right? He may be a few miles further out of town, but he is no less prepared for that than she was. He knows it's coming. And what does he hear? Vayhi ki shmoa Achav ki met navot. Right? There are not even stones in this account. This is sanitized beyond recognition, right? The poor man, he was so young, died of a heart attack, right? Nothing. What happened? No details whatsoever. Don't tell me. I don't want to know.
The elders are also cut out of the story.
Yes.
Who would be the ones who would then determine that the king now could inherit? So they're not even part of this.
Right. But she just says to him, go inherit the vineyard. He doesn't say to her, and that's why if there's any pretense of his real ignorance, that is gone now, because he would have said, what do you mean, go inherit it. If he died, why should I inherit it? He doesn't ask that question. He doesn't not want to know. All right? And he then goes, let's go on now. Vayakom, just at the bottom there, Vayakom achav laredet. And I think that verb is really packs some power here. He gets up to go down, right? He's going down into the gutter here. That's where he's put himself, this mighty king. Okay. At this point, the prophet enters the picture and has his say. God speaks to the prophet. Okay? He has to mirror the actions of Achav. He got up to go down. If you're going to meet him, you're going to have to get up and go down and meet him down there, because that's where he is. V'dibata elav lemor, ko amar Hashem. These three words that have made it into modern Hebrew parlance: haratzachta v'gam yarashta. Okay, would you murder, or have you murdered and also inherited? Right? Would you murder and inherit as well? Is there no end to your flagrant flouting of all decency? To murder and to benefit from it as well. Okay, and these words are so powerful because, first of all, we have the word ratzachta, right? Even though there were, how many stages of separation did we count? 6? That one pronoun speaks volumes. God doesn't say haratzchu v'gam yarashta, or hashalachta sfarim, or ha'im dibarta im izevel v'hishoch. Right? God doesn't seem to care about all those intermediate stages. God cuts right through it and says, you have murdered. In addition, this is the verb that is chosen. We have not seen that verb before. What verb is used by the people in the story? This one, right? Death. Death by, it could have been anything. But God says, no, it wasn't death by anything. It was death by murder. This is murder, and you, Achav, directly, personally, despite all of your ingenious efforts to distance yourself, you are the sole responsible party in this murder. Well, we'll see. Izebel's not going to meet such a great end either, but he is the primary responsible party in this thing.
Also, the Yarashta mirrors the Yerusha.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And now here comes the slightly, well, what can I say, disgusting part of the story. Bimkom asher lakeku hakelavim et dam navot, yaloku hakelavim et damcha gan ata. I don't want to get into this too much. The only reason it's here on your page, I could have spared you with some more ... but I wanted to just point out that the story ends up with our eating thing yet again. This time it is the dogs who are going to have a very plentiful meal of Achav. And then comes our word. Vayomer ya'an hitmakercha la'asot hara be'enei Hashem. And the word comes in later again, twice, hitmaker, because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of God. And I want to say, and I'm going to move toward conclusion with this, I think this word is the best description of how all of this thing happened, is kind of gradual selling of the self, a combination of Achav and Izevel, right? They've done it together. But this is a story of the psychological, incremental, increasing criminal activity. Again, it begins in the heart with coveting, with rage, with rationalizations, with victimhood, with a license to do anything in the name of self-defense. It moves to speech, this sense of false testimonies we saw, the absence of speech, silence at that critical moment where she says, I'll take care of it, and he doesn't say how or doesn't say don't. Right? We get the sense that these actions then take on a life of their own, and they perpetuate themselves and bring on these almost inevitable increments. But there's more. Okay, we talked about Rambam and even Ezra talking about progressions and increments, but we also talked about the chiastic structure here, the ABC, CBA, and this dialectic kind of self-reinforcing cycle. And I want to end with that. There's something dialectical going on here. And as
Before you get
well,
onto the direct, there's
I'm
a
sorry?
serious omission here.
yes.
Yeah, it's a concept of chrote and active. That just what about the aging bliao?
Yes, you know what? It's a very important point. I'm going to take a question afterwards because they're going to turn into they need to tune into somebody else in 5 minutes. I just want to say, as a final point of the evening, I think that in justifying terrible actions, it's not just that we rationalize ourselves and vilify others. We also, and this is the critical point, we build a philosophy around actions that we have already committed. Our rabbis had a great term for this, a great phrase for this. They said, "Acharei hapeulot nimshachim halevavot." That sometimes we act first, and then our heart catches up with us and tells us that what we did was the right thing to do. Often, after a crime is committed, we become, and this is counterintuitive, we become more committed to the crime, and our actions and our speech are going to conform to what we've already done. The term cognitive dissonance, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. The person who coined the phrase, anybody for the money? Yes. Leon Festinger. He says basically what the problem is that we see ourselves as good people, but sometimes we do things that seem like they're bad, and we can't live this way. We come up with something that's called dissonance reduction, which doesn't mean that we change the action that isn't the good action. What do we do instead? We adjust the emotion, right? The emotion to suit the action after we've committed it. We tell ourselves we were right for doing it, and not only were we right, we're going to prove we were right by doing more of it. Okay, it's astounding when you think of it, but it's the heart, the speech, the action, and then the heart again to say, yes, that was right, and now I'm more committed to it because I've done it already. And I want to just move to a conclusion by giving you 2 examples from the ridiculous to the deadly serious. The ridiculous is Woody Allen in his wonderful book of weird essays. He writes about this guy named Needleman, and I'm going to quote from you. He says the following. He says, "At the opera in Milan with my daughter and me, Needleman leaned out of his box and fell into the orchestra pit. Too proud to admit it was a mistake, he attended the opera every night for a month and repeated it each time. Soon, he developed a mild brain concussion. I pointed out that he could stop falling, as his point had been made. He said, no, a few more times, it's really not so bad." Okay, now, it's silly, but what's his point, right? What's he saying is this poor guy, this poor Zhlub Needleman, he has to tell himself, the world, but more importantly himself, that I can't be this schlemiel who falls on balconies, right? The thought would create cognitive dissonance, right? He wants to think of himself as, I'm not a loser, I don't do that, so I'm going to do that over and over to show that I actually meant to do it. It's the thing that I meant to do. It's justified. Okay, you might wonder, how does this become more serious? Well, I want to quote a good friend who's a professor here at the Hebrew University. His name is Professor Henry Zuckir, and he brings evidence that the Germans after World War II were actually more anti-Semitic than they were before. It's mind-blowing when you think about it, right? It wasn't the philosophy that made them kill Jews. It was the killing the Jews that made them more committed to the philosophy. Because after they've done it, if they say we are monsters, that impossible cognitive dissonance sets in. So instead they have to say, well, that must have been justified somehow, which means they are the monsters, not us. Right? This kind of after-the-fact justification is something that I think is very real and very human. And I just want to give you one final biblical example of it. If you look at your page of sources, it's source number 4. When Yaakov sells the birthright to his brother, Esav, right? Now, Esav sells it. I'm sorry. Esav sells the birthright to Yaakov, and he sells it. Why does he sell it? What does he really want? Food. It's an impulsive act. Take it. But after he sells it, it's fascinating. The text tells us, Vayochal, Vayesht, Vayakom, Vayelach, and only after he's eaten it, Vayivez Esav et ha-bechorah. He despises the bechorah. He doesn't sell it because he despised it. He sells it for some other reason entirely. But after he sold it, after he got rid of it, after the deed was done, he builds a new philosophy around it. I never wanted it anyway. It was terrible to begin with. Okay? Basically, what I'm trying to say here is there is this self-reinforcing cycle where a person reaches a point of no return. If the philosophy keeps on justifying what we've done, right? Everything, the heart, the mind, the body is constantly involved and reinforced. Every part of the person has bought into this. The process, in a sense, has bought the person. The sale is a self-sale. We begin, I'll put it this way, we begin with an action and we end with a transaction. And the irony here is that the choice for evil was never consciously made, but the process spiraled until we're no longer making level-headed decisions. And here I just want to end on a more positive note. It sounds like the cycle of crime is unbreakable, but I want to point out that the sale of the self, like many sales, need not be a final sale. As we all know, there are strong, brave people who come back from addictions of all kinds, physical and moral. Ultimately, even addiction and the way back from it are choices. And I want to end by talking about that, the heart, the pivotal organ with which everything begins. It can always be reconstrued, refashioned, brought back from the abyss. And I want to end by quoting from one of my favorite psukim in all of Tanakh, from the 18th chapter of the book of Yechezkel. Hashlichu be'alechem et kol tish'echem. Cast off all your sins. Va'asu lachem lev chadash. This is just astounding when you think about it. Create for yourselves a new heart. Why should you die, says God? Despite the seemingly inevitable progressions and the addictive nature of crime, in the end, the heart, that ingenious, complex, amazingly resilient organ, God says, is ours to be construed anew. Good night, everybody. From Jerusalem.